There was something in my life from boyhood on that I felt deep within my body and soul that there was something I should know about myself that no one could tell me or talk about. Everybody enjoyed the Triplets, getting looking at us. Had different names. One minister came in, he says, well, I know the exact name for these triplets. Peter, James, and John. And, of course, that was Christ's favorite apostles. And then another one came in and say, well, no, that doesn't sound right. Don, Ron, and Vaughn is what they should be called. Don, Ron, and Vaughn. So, I think I was Vaughn. What is odd about the whole situation, when we were adopted by other couples, John Birch kept his name, John Jones kept his name, but he lost the other one, and I was James, and I never did care much for James. It sounds too much like I was a dignitary from England, you know, but I don't care what they call us. We were glad to be adopted and so forth. My brother, John Jones, he lived in Kennett, Missouri. That's about 30 miles from Poplar Bluff, from which I was brought up or later moved to. Of course, we were in the same grade. He was such and such grade at Kennett, and I was in the same grade at Poplar Bluff. There was a girl in Poplar Bluff that he knew, and he had a date with her that night. I had worked in a drugstore. I moved from Jackson from a $3 a week job to a drugstore in Poplar Bluff at $8 a week. That was at school and on Saturdays and weekends and so forth. One night, I wasn't there at the time. I was home. It was my night off. And John and this girlfriend, Pauline Rust was her name, came into the drugstore. Doc Delaney, he was one of the co-owners of the drugstore. And back in World War I, he had an affliction, speech affliction. And he would be talking about something, and then he'd go, and go on and talk normally, and then go, And John came in and said, does Jim Hahn work in here? Dr. Lenny looked at him, and he said, now, Jim, you know, yeah, you're kidding with me. Said, why aren't you home tonight from work? And John said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not Jim Hahn. And he says, I want you to wait right here. I'm going to call a person, and he's coming down here to see you. So Dr. Delaney called me, and he says, come down to the stores as soon as you can. So I went down there and walked in, and I looked at that fellow, and he looked at me, and honestly, it was like shaking hands with myself in a mirror. What's your name? He said, John Jones. Where do you live? He says, at Kennett. And I said, well, I've heard about you, that somebody down there at Kennett that looks like me, and now you're up here where I live. And I said, boy, this is absolutely fantastic. I think I was about 17 at the time. So my mother happened to be downtown for some reason. And she walked in, and she didn't like that meeting too well. She seemed very nervous about it and so forth and so on. But anyway, I said, well, John, how old are you? He told me, 17. I said, when's your birthday? He says, February the 2nd. I said, what? February the 2nd. I said, well, that's my birthday. So my mom interrupted and said, well, you know. Oh, boy. She laughed it off and says, you know, everybody has a twin in the world. And he said, evidently you two have met tonight for the first time. So John was very much disturbed after he left, because he went out to a young place where they dance and so forth of our generation, of my generation. And there was some girls there that worked in the same drugstore as I did. When he did go out there with his date, they said, hey, Jim, come here. Come over here. So he walks over there and he says, I beg your pardon, but he says, my name is not Jim. I says, what? You're not Jim Hahn? No, I'm John Jones of Kennett. She said, boy, if you're not Jim Hahn, rather, I've had one drink too many. So, he was very much disturbed. I was told later by his date that he thought something was aloof somewhere. And us both having the same birthdays, the same date, same month, it was more than just a coincidence. So that was something that he and I pondered for a long time. My brother in Arkansas was the first one to ever contact me by phone. When I answered the phone that night, he says, is this James W. Hahn? And I said, yes. He said, how the hell are you, brother? And what a feeling it was.